There's a phrase you've heard about Scorpio, repeated so many times it's become truth without ever being proven, that it's a dangerous, vengeful sign, obsessed with control, almost cursed for feeling too much. You've laughed at it, defended yourself against it, maybe even used it to explain why someone walked away without explanation. But what if this whole story, this idea of evil stuck to the sign, was just the part that's left over after nobody wanted to understand the rest? Think about it. Scorpios never disappear out of nowhere. They walk away after silently observing something that others didn't even notice happening. They hold grudges, not out of resentment, but because they feel with an intensity that most people don't have the vocabulary to name. They call it evil because it's easier to label than to understand. It's more comfortable to say, this sign is dark, than to ask why they learned early on that trust comes at a high price. What nobody told you, behind every supposed evil of Scorpio lies a memory. Once, his loyalty was used against him. He opened his heart and received silence in return, or worse, betrayal disguised as care. The body learns, and what remains is not malice. It's protection with an iron armor. Only this armor seen from the outside seems cold. It seems like a power game. People confuse depth with manipulation because they've never sunk deep enough to understand the difference. He observes before acting, feels before speaking. And when he decides to distance himself, it's not impulse. It's the result of an internal process that has run hundreds of times before becoming a decision. Scorpio doesn't forget. But this isn't about revenge. It's about emotional memory, a defense system that learned, through pain, that carelessness is costly. And here's the first thread that pulls this story to an uncomfortable place. If Scorpio's so-called evil was never malice, but rather a response to some old wound, then perhaps what you've always seen as a flaw is, in fact, the most honest portrait of a pain that no one has dared to face head-on. Notice something almost no one realizes. The harshest labels attached to Scorpios never come from those who have lived closely with them long enough to see what lies beneath. They come from the outside, from those who only witnessed the final reaction, the withdrawal, and never saw the entire process that led up to it. It's like judging a fire without ever having seen the spark that started it all. There's an internal vigilance constantly on, a radar that picks up intentions even before words are spoken. This isn't a free, mystical gift. It's a scar functioning as an alarm system, the result of a time when intuition was ignored and the consequence hurt too much. No one tells them that feeling deeply isn't a flaw, that perceiving too much isn't madness, that holding a grudge longer than expected is just the mark of a heart that has been misinterpreted before. But overprotecting also comes at a price. Because when you build walls high enough to never be caught off guard again, you also prevent the good from entering. And therein lies perhaps the most painful part of this whole story. The evil attributed to Scorpio may be an echo of a solitude he himself created to survive, but which also distances him from the things he most desires: intimacy, trust, surrender. And if that's the case, the question that remains isn't, why is Scorpio like this? The question is, what happened to you that made you also build your own version of this armor, but without ever having had the courage to admit it aloud? This question is unsettling because it doesn't let you hide behind your zodiac sign. It takes you back inside yourself to the exact moment when you also decided it was safer to close the door than to risk feeling again. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose doesn't treat Scorpio as a problem to be fixed. It treats intensity as raw material, as something that, when understood, ceases to be a prison and becomes direction. It speaks precisely about this: how to transform excessive vigilance into discernment, distrust into criteria, accumulated resentment into clarity about who truly deserves to stay. It's for those who are tired of living on the surface of their own emotions and know that they only find peace when they get to the heart of the matter. You, who have watched this far, have probably recognized a piece of yourself in each sentence. And this recognition is still fresh, still unsettling, still demanding practical guidance, so it doesn't become just another reflection you forget tomorrow. It's in this still touch state that a real turning point happens, because after the mind rationalizes the discomfort, it evaporates and the opportunity passes. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now, download your copy. Now tell me in the comments, when was the last time you held onto a grudge for too long just because you were afraid of seeming weak by admitting it hurt? We often think we know the exact moment we've decided to trust someone. We don't. A Scorpio's trust never comes from an invitation. It comes from a test the other person didn't even realize they were conducting. Small things. Whether their words match their actions, whether their care continues when no one is looking, whether they disappear when things get tough. This is recorded silently, layer upon layer, until it forms a verdict no one announced. And when the verdict is negative, there's no scolding, no argument, just distance. A polite distance, almost invisible at first, that outsiders call, "He changed out of nowhere." He didn't change out of nowhere. He just stopped giving you the benefit of the doubt that had already run out long ago. This has a name that psychology understands well: relational hypervigilance. It's what happens when someone has learned, usually in childhood or in a significant relationship, that neglecting attention is costly. Perhaps it was a promise broken too many times. Perhaps it was growing up in an environment where love came with hidden conditions. A Scorpio's body remembers this like a muscle remembers an old injury. It doesn't forget the movement that hurt and avoids repeating it, even if the context has changed. On the outside, it seems like gratuitous distrust. On the inside, it's a nervous system trying, in the only way it has learned, to prevent the same pain from happening again. But this system has a factory defect. It can't differentiate between a real threat and a perceived threat. So sometimes it triggers even when it doesn't need to, closing doors that were actually safe, pushing away people who would never have done the harm that others have done before. And here lies one of the most silent pains of being a Scorpio. Protecting oneself too much also means, unintentionally, punishing those who never deserved to be punished. It's living in a constant contradiction between the genuine desire for intimacy and the automatic fear that intimacy always ends in betrayal. There's an even more hidden pattern, one that almost no Scorpio recognizes in themselves until they hear someone describe it from the outside: the unconscious attraction to situations that confirm the age-old belief that no one can be trusted. It's not deliberate sabotage. It's the brain seeking evidence to support what it has already decided to be true, because this, however painful, is more predictable than the chaos of trusting and being surprised. Choosing unavailable partners, testing the limits of friendships until they break, interpreting silence as rejection before even asking what's going on. All this keeps the internal script intact. I knew it would go wrong, and agreeing with this script hurts less than admitting that maybe this time it would have worked if you had given it a real chance. There's also the side that almost never comes up in discussions about Scorpio: guilt. The guilt of feeling anger towards someone you love. The guilt of holding a grudge against someone who has already apologized. The guilt of knowing deep down that you're being unfair by judging the present by the scars of the past, and yet not being able to let go of it as quickly as you'd like. Nobody talks about the exhaustion of carrying a radar that never turns off, that senses the emotional temperature of a room before a single word is spoken, that registers every micro-variation in tone of voice as if it were evidence in a court of law. It's exhausting to always be on alert, and it's even more exhausting to pretend to others that this is just a strong personality, when in reality it's uninterrupted vigilance. There's a detail that goes unnoticed in almost every superficial analysis of this sign: the difference between distrusting others and distrusting oneself. Many people think that Scorpio only suspects the intentions of others, but the most uncomfortable truth is something else. They distrust, primarily, their own capacity for judgment. Because they've been wrong before, they've trusted those who didn't deserve it, defended those they shouldn't have, and been on the wrong side of a story without realizing it in time. And this mistake, once made, becomes a scar that changes how they process every future decision. It's not the other person they fear, deep down. It's the possibility of being wrong again, of repeating the same misreading, of trusting the wrong person again, and having to carry the weight of disappointment alone. This explains why Scorpio analyzes so much before opening up. They're not testing you most of the time. They're testing their own intuition, trying to confirm if what they feel matches what experience has taught them to fear. This self-confidence has a consequence that is rarely discussed: emotional paralysis disguised as coldness. On the outside, it seems like he doesn't care, that he's distant, indifferent, too busy processing things internally to show any outward reaction. But what's happening most of the time is such intense internal processing that the only way to avoid being overwhelmed is to reduce external expression to almost nothing. It's like an electrical system that, upon receiving too much voltage, cuts off the visible power to avoid burning out the entire circuit. People around him mistake this cutoff for lack of love. In reality, it's an excess of love being processed at a speed that facial expressions simply can't keep up with. That weariness of always being on alert, of never being able to switch off the radar even when you want to rest, is exactly where the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose comes in as a practical tool, not just pretty talk. It teaches you to differentiate real signals from old emotional noise so you can stop wasting energy watching ghosts that no longer exist in the present. For a sign that only finds peace by going deep, this material is the right invitation to go deep with direction, instead of going deep alone and exhausted. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and start your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a huge difference between power and control, and that's precisely where the biggest misunderstanding about Scorpio lies. Power for this sign is the ability to remain whole, even within emotional chaos, to not dissolve into the pain of others or one's own. Control is the desperate attempt to predict every variable so as never to be caught off guard again. The first is maturity. The second is fear disguised as strength. And the problem is that from the outside, they both seem exactly the same. Someone who doesn't show fragility, who doesn't beg, who maintains composure in any situation. Only those on the inside know the difference between being at peace and merely being well-trained to appear at peace. The rebirth so often associated with Scorpio isn't about becoming a different person. It's about stopping confusing survival with identity. Someone who has spent years surviving emotionally learns to call that their personality. I'm distrustful. I'm too intense. I'm difficult to put up with. But survival isn't who you are. It's just the way you found to keep standing while it still hurt too much to find another way. And the day a Scorpio understands this difference is the day they stop defending themselves from ghosts that no longer exist in the present. This distinction seems simple on paper, but in practice it requires overcoming enormous resistance, because the identity built on survival gives a false sense of security. It is predictable. It has proven time and again that it works to avoid pain. Exchanging that for a more open version of oneself seems, at first glance, an unnecessary risk, an invitation to repeat old mistakes. But what few realize is that survival itself has a limit. It protects against pain, but it also prevents growth, because growth requires exposure, and exposure is exactly what the defense system has been trained to avoid at all costs. It's like keeping a muscle permanently contracted to avoid an injury that has already healed years ago. The protection that was once necessary now only limits movement. Distinguishing between power and control is one of the most liberating lessons for those born under this sign. And it is precisely this type of discernment that the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose helps to build step by step, without cliches and without promising that the intensity will disappear, because it doesn't need to disappear, it just needs to stop being used against yourself. It's about transforming survival into a chosen identity, not one inherited from fear. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a scene that repeats itself in the life of almost every Scorpio, even if each one tells it differently. The moment when they finally tell the truth they've been swallowing for months, and the other person's reaction isn't gratitude, it's surprise, almost indignation, as if that truth had appeared out of nowhere. Why didn't you ever tell me this before? And the answer, which is rarely spoken aloud, is simple and painful, because the last time I told the truth too soon, it was used against me. So silence became a strategy. Holding back became synonymous with security. And when the dam finally bursts, the accumulated volume scares everyone, including the Scorpio themselves, who also didn't expect it to hurt so much to hold back for so long. This is the real evil attributed to this sign. It's not malice. It's the price of learning to survive alone within one's own emotions. It's the loneliness of feeling everything in high definition while the world around seems to operate in low resolution without perceiving half of what's happening beneath the surface. And perhaps that's exactly why Scorpio seeks, with an urgency they can't always name, a connection that doesn't require them to constantly explain themselves, someone or some practice capable of decoding this intensity without asking them to slow down. There's a specific moment, almost always after a major breakup, when Scorpio makes a decisive choice without realizing it. Either they close themselves off even more, reinforcing every brick of their own fortress, or they decide, still trembling, that it's worth trying again, even knowing it might hurt again. This choice is never made aloud. It happens slowly, in small decisions. Replying to a message instead of ignoring it, allowing someone to see a glimpse of their vulnerability instead of hiding behind irony, staying in an uncomfortable place a little longer instead of running away at the first sign of risk. No one applauds these small choices because no one sees them from the outside. But these are the choices that determine whether the armor becomes a permanent prison or whether, little by little, they learn to open a crack only when it's truly worthwhile. Holding on to the truth until it explodes is exhausting, and no one should have to carry that burden alone forever, deciding alone between closing another door or risking leaving it ajar. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose speaks directly to how to communicate your own intensity without waiting for the dam to overflow, how to ask for what you need before silence turns into accumulated resentment, transforming each small choice of openness into something more conscious. It's the difference between feeling everything alone and feeling everything with direction. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. The ultimate paradox is this: the more a Scorpio tries to shield themselves from pain, the further they distance themselves from the very kind of deep connection that only they, among all the signs, are truly capable of sustaining. No one loves more loyally when they decide to truly love. No one forgives more deeply when they choose to truly forgive, not out of obligation, but because they recognize that the other person is also human and also makes mistakes. The problem was never the intensity. The problem was always not having received, early enough, permission to feel that way without being called exaggerated, dark, or too difficult to understand. In the end, perhaps the most beautiful truth about Scorpio is this: what some call evil was never malice, but a depth that no one taught them to properly embrace. It's the rare ability to feel without anesthesia, to love without half measures, to rise from one's own ashes as many times as necessary, without ever losing the essence of who one truly is beneath the layers of protection. Perhaps the invitation isn't to stop feeling all of this, but to learn, little by little, that not every door needs a lock, that not every surrender ends in betrayal, and that there is immense strength in choosing, even so, to remain capable of opening oneself up. This is the silent beauty that dwells within every Scorpio, the ability to transform one's own darkness into a light that only those who have descended deep enough can see.